Good evening. Welcome to the final session of the 4th Wellness Summit, Building Resilience in 2020. My name is Anna Saul, and I am the moderator for tonight's session. Now, I've been part of the Wellness Summit committee since its inception, and I also work at the Siegel JCC. In 2018, 16-year-old J staff member Sarah Segerstrom died by suicide. And a group of individuals from the J, from Jewish Family Services, and from Jewish Federation of Delaware came together to come up with a way to help our community heal. And together we created the Wellness Summit to open up those honest lines of communication about mental health and to reduce the stigma around mental illness. And I'm really excited to be here as we're bringing our 4th Wellness Summit virtual for the first time to a close. Our keynote speaker this evening is Dr. Meghan Walls. Dr. Meghan Walls' list of accomplishments would take me way too long to get through tonight, so I just want to share some highlights. Dr. Walls is a pediatric psychologist in the Division of Behavioral Health at Nemours AI DuPont Hospital for Children. Among her mental health work, she's the State Advocacy Chair on the Executive Committee of the Delaware Psychological Association and co-chair of the Data and Policy Committee for the Lieutenant Governor's Behavioral Health Consortium. Dr. Walls also holds an appointment to the Board of Directors of the Society of Pediatric Psychology. She's incredibly active in our community in the Red Clay School District and is a fellow in the Leadership Delaware class of 2020. And I'm so looking forward to hearing her on our Wellness Summit stage again. I invite you to ask questions during the presentation using the Q&A feature, and I'll ask Dr. Walls your questions as she's ready for them. And anything that we can't get to, we'll be posting answers and resources after the session to our landing page at siegeljcc.org/wellness. So without further ado, please welcome Dr. Meghan Walls.
Thanks, Anna. I'm happy to be here. And, like Anna said, I've been a part of the summit, I think, since the beginning of this. So always have given some sort of a talk or participated in some way. And I'm really happy to do so again tonight. Also always happy to partner with JFS and the JCC. Nemours certainly considers them great partners of ours in making sure that behavioral health needs are met in Delaware. So thank you to all of you at JCC and JFS who ensure that people are getting the care they need and who are always willing and open to partner with us. When I was asked to do this sort of keynote closing about resilience, I thought about doing a slideshow, but I think the fact is by the end of the day, people are sick of staring at slides. So I get to look at my own face while I talk. And I certainly encourage folks to ask questions. You do not have to wait until I'm done talking. There's a relatively small group of people. So certainly type them in the Q&A, or if you're like me and forget and end up in the chat, that's okay. I'm sure Anna or I will see them and try to get to them. So I know there's been a lot of talk during the summit about resilience and about kind of coping with what we're going through right now. And one of the things I've been asked to talk a lot about is how COVID is impacting us and what we can do. And the secondary piece of that is, how do we help people be resilient? And I think first we need to understand what resilience is. I think we throw around that term a lot, and we talk about it in this way that it's a good thing and we know it's a good thing, and maybe it means bouncing back, or maybe it means being able to deal with bad things. And I think the truth is it means a combination of those things. And I think what resilience looks like is different in different people depending on what they've gone through. But in the spirit of keeping this positive and really focusing on that piece, I think it's important to think a little bit about what we do know about the actual science of resilience. So what do we know about the fact that things can go wrong and people can still recover? And the thing is, we know a lot about it, and we know more and more recently. And one of the coolest things I think as a psychologist is that psychology has always been considered sort of this soft science, if you will. And people have said, okay, we can go to therapy and we can feel better, but is it actually making us better? And now we're able to look at research on something we call epigenetics, which is basically the genetics at the end of your DNA. And what your epigenetics hold is your stress response. So the way we respond to stress is actually built into our DNA. We get it passed down to us from our parents and our grandparents. And I think that's both really powerful and also can help us understand why it's harder for some people to deal with stress than others, and why perhaps we're not all starting on the same playing field. So for example, if a family has years and years of trauma due to, say, living in the city and experiencing gun violence, their grandchildren and great grandchildren might have a higher stress response to start. And we can measure that and we can look at it and we can look at that through DNA and through cortisol and other things. But the cool thing, I think, is that when we look at kids, particularly, when we look at their epigenetics as they grow up, if you look at adopted kids, it's actually more similar to their adoptive parents than to their biological parents. And what that says to us is what we do matters. How we react matters. How we teach people to cope matters. We can change people's genetics. And I'm not sure there's anything from a very nerdy science perspective that's cooler than that. And so I talk about that because I think it's so important to know resilience is not just this word, but instead it's actually this concept of changing how people respond and or helping them respond to make them able to handle things better. And one of the big things that I think is important to think about in your families, whether it's with kids or adults, is that during COVID, a lot of us have had a lot of different stressors happening. And I think we get stuck sometimes because a pandemic is very different than reality. And we want to make sure that we're thinking about, how do we handle some of these things? But the other thing that I've recognized a lot in my patient families, my own family, is that there are things that do really protect and support people during this. And we can all help each other to become more resilient, and we can certainly help our families to become more resilient. How, right? So we can talk about this for hours, right? And make it sound really good, but what do we do? Well, first of all, one of the things that we need to do is accept that things go wrong. So both adults and kids really struggle with this concept. And I tell parents all the time, the best gift you can give to your children is to let them mess up, is to let them be sad, is to let them be angry, and to let them sit with how it feels and let it be normal. And the best gift you can give to your partners and to your own parents, right, is to let people have things go wrong and then deal with them. If nothing ever goes wrong, we don't know how to deal with things. And so the reason that I think COVID has sort of shifted how we feel so much is because we have gotten into this place where we can't protect ourselves, whether that's physically from illness or whether that's I can't see my family because they live in California and we couldn't go there for a very long time. This has impacted everyone. So I like to think about what we can do to help, because this is one thing that a lot of people share, and COVID has impacted people differently. So we know that our lower income communities, our Black and Brown communities have been impacted further by COVID, both physically and mental health wise in terms of resources and things like that. But COVID is a common stressor, right? And as I think about wellness, I think about how do we cope with stress? And we really need to think about resilience in that way. Resilience is just how do we cope with the bad things or the hard things and move on. And a huge piece of that, a huge piece of that is social support. So when you think about your social support, I like people to think about not just who's my good friend or who's my family, but who can I actually trust and who can I talk to when things go wrong? And if you're a parent out there listening, I think this is especially important for teenagers. Social support can't just be their friends, although it's incredibly important in the teenage years. It needs to be also trusted adults. For adults, it needs to be other adults who you feel are validating and empathizing. And sometimes that means finding a therapist who can help you do that, because adulthood is hard and not everyone knows how to respond to you. But that social support is probably the number one thing in terms of importance for being resilient. But there are a ton of other things that are also important, right? So I think the other things we need to think about are things like setting realistic goals for yourself. Things like, if you are having a hard time, that you shouldn't do things like say, I'm going to get this entire, paper written for work today. That is not really how you become resilient. How you become resilient is, this is hard. I'm going to set a small goal for myself today and I'm going to overcome it and I'm going to feel successful. And then from there are other things, right? So things like problem solving. How do we get through this together? And if you don't know how to problem solve it, that you seek out other ways. So the thing that I tell people a lot about this one is that if you are someone who you're like, I don't really know how to get through this problem, it's really getting in my way, is to do things like write it down, right? Take your problem, write down what it is, and really move on from there. Um, One of the things that I like to tell kids is if you write down your problem and think of 3 solutions, I don't care what they are, and for adults too, they could be silly. One solution could be like, I'm never going to work again, right? Shouldn't be the one you pick, but problem solving and working through it, picking a solution and then trying it. This problem solving is really just finding some good hypotheses you can try, and then if they don't work, trying again. Other things that make people resilient are learning from their mistakes. So I might mess this one thing up, but I'm going to try again anyway, um, and try to get them to sort of think about how do we get back up when we fall down. The other thing is having some willingness to avoid or to not avoid your difficulties, right? So let's talk about how we overcome this problem, not how we stop having this problem, because that's just life. I know earlier today, when Anna and I were talking, some folks were talking about reframing thoughts, and I'm not sure if others were on that. So I'll talk just a little bit about that. But, thinking about what I call optimistic thinking patterns. So thinking about, okay, there's this hard thing that's happening. How can I flip that? How can I reframe that thought? So things like, if you feel like COVID's never going to end, instead flipping that is, I'll be so glad when this is over because I'll get to do X, Y, Z, right? So writing those things down, really focusing on the positive that will come next. And then also thinking about self-control, right? So what can I actually do? Not just what can happen outside of myself with the people I love, but what can I do? And sometimes that means that you're thinking about things like, how can I teach myself um, deep breathing, right? And one of the things that I think is really important is thinking about things like, if I'm really stressed about work and I can't flip that thought, what else can I do? Right. So having some backup skills. So things like, um, you can, and I like to tell people, even though probably some of the paid apps would like me to tell you to use them, YouTube is actually a really great resource for things like diaphragmatic breathing, progressive muscle relaxation, guided imagery. And I'll talk a little bit more about those things, but I want to also, acknowledge that there are some things that's really difficult to flip. A question that popped up is, how do you flip unknown like the election results? And so, I have a couple thoughts on this because I think, I've been saying that um, there are the election itself has been incredibly stressful for people on top of a pandemic. Um, I suggest a couple things. One is, this is really hard, and I will self-disclose that it's really hard for me too, and I have a hard time doing this. But part of it is actually turning off the TV sometimes, or turning off your social media and taking a break. And while that's not easy for any of us to do, especially in this contested of an election when there's so much on the line, that is incredibly important for us to take a break. The second thing is, what I've been suggesting to some of my teenage patients and their parents who talk about this, I have a lot of patients who feel very much that they need one candidate to get elected, or their rights are going to be, kind of taken away, or XYZ. And we talk a lot about not how can you reframe the election itself, perhaps, but how can you reframe your thoughts about it? So instead of thinking, I am just going to move to another country if this election doesn't go the way I want, we talk about doing things like, this is the country I want, and how do I get there? Right? You know what? If the election doesn't go the way I want, I'm allowed to be sad. That's okay. And then what? So some of my teenage patients that I talk to, we talk about what they're going to do next, that they're going to be more active, or that they get to vote next cycle. And for us adults, I think we've all realized that's more important than perhaps folks had realized in the past. But I think focusing on what you are going to do gives you a lot more sense of purpose than just an election result. So I'm going to, in the next 3 days, maybe I'm going to phone bank for a candidate I like, or maybe I'm going to go walk around a neighborhood for a candidate I like. And afterwards, if it doesn't turn out the way I like, I'm going to work harder next time. And the other piece of that is letting yourself feel that disappointment, right? Reframing your thoughts or thinking about things differently doesn't mean you're not going to be angry, sad, upset, and you need to give yourself some space for that. One of the things that I think comes up when we talk about resilience also is this concept of there are different ways to think about this in terms of time. So the election is this incredibly intense thing this week, but in 2 weeks from now, even if we don't like the elections, it just probably won't feel as intense. And we call this, like in psychology world, riding the wave of your emotions. So I'm allowed to feel really bad tonight or tomorrow or the next day or even next week, and I will start to feel better naturally, because that thing will go away. When our stressors don't go away, it's much harder. But the election is a thing, even though the aftermath is incredibly important to many, many groups of people, that the event itself will go away. And so often the feeling can go up and down as opposed to just feeling terrible all the time. But I think thinking about what you can do and how you can wrap your brain around that is incredibly important. And I also think we can think about this in terms of time, right? What can I do today to help me? Well, today I'm really angry or sad. And so today my option is that I'm going to take some deep breaths and I'm going to use, the Calm app or YouTube and do diaphragmatic breathing. I'm feeling too angry or upset today to flip my thought. That's not happening for me today. That's okay. That is one of the one of the beauties of when we do have people in therapy is we talk about that it's okay to have days when your coping skills need to be different. One of the things that I tell people to use when they're feeling really stressed, and I mentioned this, but I'll mention it again, is things like progressive muscle relaxation. And if you look that up, progressive muscle relaxation is literally clenching and releasing all the muscles in your body one at a time. So it talks about squeezing your hands as tight as a lemon and really squeezing hard and then letting go. Or it might talk about, putting your shoulders up really high. And if any of you are sitting there and can do this right now, I highly suggest it. And then slowly letting them go and feeling the stress kind of drain out. So sometimes the answer is we don't flip that. And I know that I wish I could solve elections for everyone, although I think I'd be an incredibly rich woman if I could do that. I can't. But what I can say is it's okay if you're sad, upset, angry, and it's okay if your coping skill is just for today. And then what do I do tomorrow? Okay, well, today I took some deep breaths and I did diaphragmatic breathing and I did progressive muscle relaxation. What can I do tomorrow? Well, tomorrow I'm going to plan to do 3 things I really enjoy. We call that behavioral activation or pleasant activity scheduling. I'm going to write down tonight 3 things I'm going to do tomorrow that make me happy. You can hold 2 emotions at the same time. You can feel angry about an election or COVID or frustrated because you've, not able to do what you want or sad and still have joy and happiness. And I think that's one of the most important things to think about is even when I'm sad, even when I'm down, even when I'm having a hard time, are there things that bring me joy? Does going on a walk bring me joy tomorrow? Great. If it does, you do that. Does playing with my kids bring me joy in this moment? I'm going to do that and I'm going to enjoy this moment. And does, maybe going out and exercising make me feel good tomorrow or today? Yes, do those things. And then you can start thinking about it longer term. Resilience doesn't build in a day. We need to teach ourselves coping skills. We need to teach ourselves who to surround ourselves with. And even for adults, as I'm sure many of you can relate to, and I can even as an adult relate to, we have to find the right people to talk to and the right people to be around when we're feeling down, who can lift us back up. And then we can think about next week, what am I going to do? In the next 2 months, what am I going to do? And then longer term, in the next year, what am I going to do? Or what am I thinking about that will be positive for me? And this is where I think the piece comes in that is so important to think about. And I know others have talked to you, and I know that JCG and JFS does a great job of reminding people of this, but it's okay if you feel like, I've done these things. I've used coping skills. I have talked to friends and family, and I still don't feel better. Okay. So then what do we do next? Well, probably what we do next is reach out and get some sort of mental health professional to help us walk through it. And that is okay and fine. And I would even say encouraged. And I think people think, well, that means I'm not resilient, or that means I'm not doing well. And I like to think about this in a reframe. I like to think about seeing a therapist or a psychologist as using your skills. You are realizing, I'm perhaps not quite as resilient as I want to be in this category, and I need some help getting there. And sometimes, even if we are able to be resilient, get over something, get through something, we still feel that lingering sadness or anger, or we can't quite get rid of it. And I just, every time I give one of these talks, I think the importance of being open to therapy and being open to having more help is one of the most important things that we can sort of think about. I know it's been mentioned in the summit over, the last couple of days, but it's easier in some ways to access mental health care via telehealth right now. And I think for some people that's harder because some people don't feel that connection. But I will tell you that I think all of these things are really important to think about. And all of these things can be a good tool. So if you are feeling like this is not going well, I can't get through it, I think that's important. But my message tonight is really about the fact that what we know, and I started off with this, right, is that people are resilient. People can get through tough things. And the other thing that I think we've seen during COVID as psychologists, which I actually think is pretty cool, is everyone talked a lot about this concern of uptick in mental health disorders, uptick in suicides. And there was just a study released a couple of days ago that said teenagers, I think it was Massachusetts, are thinking about, having suicidal thoughts more, but not actually making attempts. And there are not more deaths. And why is that? And to me, what that says is it's because we're taking away the stigma of mental health treatment. It's because when kids are having trouble, they're reaching out. It's because probably of adults like you who have kids who know they can go to their parents. And while people might see that as dim, right, that kids are having more of those thoughts, I actually see this as progress. And I think that during COVID, we have had so many difficult things. And we have this big election coming up, which, multiple people have mentioned to me today in therapy sessions and at work and here in this session already. And so that's a big thing too. And I think we need to stop holding ourselves to a standard that's unrealistic. So it's okay if you have a bad day. It is okay if you need to cry in your car listening to music. It is okay if your kid is really upset because they had a terrible day on Zoom school because they lost their connection and they didn't do their math. Those things are all okay. We have got to stop expecting perfection and start accepting okay, especially during difficult times. And when we do that, we're sending this message to the community and to our children that if we are having a hard time or if we are struggling, we can still get through it. We can still find joy. We can still think about the positives and the good and some of these things that, I think we have sort of have forgotten about a little bit during some of these difficult times. The best way you can be resilient and you can teach your kids to be resilient or your friends to be resilient is to remember that the way we become resilient is getting through hard times. We don't become resilient by having everything go well. Now, do we have less of a stress response if everything goes well? Sure. Does it make it maybe easier longer term? Sure. But we don't learn these really important skills unless we actually focus on how to become resilient. And that means things going wrong. And while none of us would choose a global pandemic to go wrong, I think that we can also think about the fact that this is different and we are all in this together and think of it as a community and that people want to take care of each other. And I really do encourage you to, especially if you're struggling right now, to take out that notebook and write down, what am I going to do today? What am I going to do tomorrow? What am I going to do in a week from now? And what do I want long term? And how do I get to those places? And can you find ways to infuse small pieces of happiness, of joy into your days? Because here's what happens to your brain if you can do that. When our brains are sort of processing that we're feeling down, depressed, or like, oh no, something's wrong. When we go out and we have, maybe we have coffee outside with a friend 6 feet apart, our brain says, oh, she must not be doing so bad. She's having coffee at the, coffee shop with her friend. Or if we go on a run, our brain says, oh, this must not be so bad. She's out on a run today. Or if you are making a dinner for your family and really enjoying it, your brain says, oh, she's making dinner for her family. And those things all tell your brain I'm doing better, and you actually do start to feel better. So the whole fake it till you make it thing is not just about, putting on that happy face, but instead it's about what are you telling your body and your brain, and how can we get through that? And I think that those things really, really help people to kind of shape how they're thinking about things and to shape how we want these things to go. And the last thing I'll say, and then we can certainly have discussion or questions. And I know Anna's running the show here. I'm happy to have people type in. I'm also happy to have people like talk if they want to. The last thing that I want to sort of leave you to think about is, what am I doing for myself that is helping me to be resilient? What am I doing for myself that is helping me to get through this really difficult time? And if you can do that for yourself, and then maybe if you're a parent for your kids or for your partner, if you're married or have someone living in your house with you, what can we do? How can we get through this together? And to have some hope, because the other thing I've been telling people over and over again is, this is hard. Elections are hard, pandemics are hard, but they're not forever, right? We know that COVID will end. We know that this election will end. And then we start on the next thing, and we start asking again, how do we get through this next thing? And how do we get to our next steps? And how do we become happier? And I think at the end of the day, what we really want to do is to help ourselves and our kids really find that joy. And if we can do that, we're really setting them on the right path. So Anna, I think we have a couple questions maybe.
Okay. We have a couple. One question is just a comment in appreciation of your keynote. So thank you. And then the second question is, how can I teach or model resilience for kids of preschool age? This anonymous attendee said they have a high-spirited child who they want to help develop coping skills of his own.
I've got one of those too, so I can empathize. Mine, you could probably hear, because I just had to send my husband a text during this talk and say, can you ask that lovely child of mine to be more quiet? So I get that. I have two big things I tell parents. One is, I really think it's important that parents check their own emotions before they react to their kids. So I want parents to have emotions. And in fact, I even encourage you to tell your kids, I'm upset about this, but I'm dealing with it. Or mommy feels sad right now, but I'm going to talk to my friend, or I'm going to read my book. Really telling them, like talking with the emotion words is really important, because what a lot of preschool kids hear is, or see, is us shying away from them as parents when we're upset. And that's not helpful. So I think the modeling part is actually letting your kids see that you're a person, right? And that you can get through it. But then also being able to show them how you do cope. So not crying on the floor in front of them for a half hour, right? Mommy's sad, I'm having a hard time. Here's what I'm doing to cope. And then show them. For preschool kids, I actually love if you use YouTube and you put in guided imagery for kids. There's some really great tools there. I have seen preschoolers do breathing and imagery better than any other humans on the planet. They are so into it and so proud of themselves. And, we have, because when you have a psychologist mom, they make you do these things. We have a video of my youngest one at like 3 saying, you need to do some diaphragmatic breathing. You seem stressed. And she'll sit on our stairs actually, and she'll count in 3 and out 3 and breathe. Teaching your kids diaphragmatic breathing. And again, Calm app has these, YouTube has these, is so cool, because you can actually watch your kids learning. And the other cool thing is, you can tell them, how do you feel now? And they'll tell you after like 30 seconds, feel better. We know that for kids, that breathing, that imagery not only makes them feel calmer, but it actually has physical responses. So we in clinics can do things like measure kids' sweat response, measure kids' temps. And we'll see that their breathing rate goes from like, I don't know, something like 20 breaths a minute to like 6 breaths a minute when they practice these things. And their heart rate will be lower and their hand temps will be higher, because when we're relaxed, our blood flows to our hands and our feet better. So kids, especially little kids, the earlier you teach this, the better off you are.
Wow, that's really helpful. Thanks for sharing. We had another question come in that is, how do you deal with an autistic child who has trouble with uncertainty? Child wants specific answers about end of COVID and we don't have it.
I wish we had them. That would be easier.
Sure.
So I've actually been telling parents, I think this goes for kids who have autism, but also just young kids, because a lot of little guys and kids who have autism want that very hard and fast answer. And so what I've been telling parents is, have answers for the easy things, right? So when is this going to end? Your answer might be, I don't know, but then follow it with, I'm going to tell you the 3 things we're going to do today about it. We are going to wash our hands every time we pass a sink. We are going to wear our mask to the store, and we're going to go on a walk outside because that's safe. And I know, I will admit, that is not perfect, but the more information we can give our kids, the better. And what I've actually been encouraging parents to do is ask your kids every couple of days, like, hey, do you have any questions? Do you want to talk about this? And for kids who have autism and are nonverbal, I actually strongly suggest they learn some of these coping skills. If it's really hard and really bad, we also do refer kids to, so Nemours has an autism behavior clinic that we refer to. There are some community providers. So if it's really hard and your kiddo is really struggling and has autism, I suggest seeking a provider. But if you think it's more, they need some structure, give them some structure, right? So write down their schedule for the day, do a picture board with what's coming next. Sometimes as adults, we internalize the unknown to mean like these great big questions, and our kids are like, I want to know what's for lunch. And I think that's true, especially for kids who have more of that rigidity. So kids with anxiety, autism. So if the more information we can give them, the better. And the other one thing I'll say is, make sure that when you give them that information, that you're giving them your full attention and that you're not stressed. So it's not, while we're running out the door, we're talking about what's happening tonight, but instead it's, we're going to sit at the table, even if it's for 2 minutes, right? And I'm going to put my phone away and give you the attention that you need so that we can actually get through that.
I appreciate it. One more question. Thank you for the suggestions. I've been struggling with the news every day and it has triggered my depression. I'll try to take a break from it.
Yeah, I think that's important just to revisit for a second. So it can feel really hard to take a break from the news for 2 reasons. One is because we want to know what's going on, but 2, I think is we feel this responsibility towards knowing what to do in reaction to the news. And it is both important to be involved and know what's going on and to take care of yourself. Because I always tell people, if the news is triggering your depression, that means that you're less productive in probably other areas of your life. If you take a break from the news and you're more productive in other areas of your life, you can go back to the news. But you can't get that time back, right? You can't get that time if you're, really into the news, going down that rabbit hole on maybe, Twitter or social media. And I think that we also have all felt the impact of the sort of heavy presence of social media lately with the news, right? So the other thing I'll tell people is not just a break from the news, but a break from screens and a break from social media. If you have teenagers, I highly suggest the app Screen Time. It is wonderful. It just turns off their device when they're done. They can't turn it back on. Actually, for younger kids too, my 8-year-old has a Screen Time app on her tablet, so she's allowed to watch, kid stuff, but it turns off after an hour. So I think that we need to all put those in place. And as parents, I will say that as a self-care technique, my iPhone reminds me when I'm supposed to go to bed. I have it's set for bedtime and wake up time, and I try to keep to it. And it's difficult for everyone, even if you're a psychologist. But I think using some of those tools that we have, turning off your phones, turning off those TVs, turning off social media, and sort of just thinking about, what can I do tonight that's good for myself? What can I do that brings me joy versus what can I do that's going to take me down this rabbit hole where now I'm going to feel terrible because I just spent 3 hours reading the news. So I think those are really important things for adults and kids. And that we all just really think about the importance of giving ourselves time and allowing ourselves to feel like we deserve that time.
Thank you. I mean, that's the advice is so practical and it's so
And we
relevant.
all need help with it because, as I'm answering my phone at 10 o'clock at night, like I think we all need it. But I think it's a really important thing to think about during this time. Just, you deserve the self-care and you deserve to give yourself that time.
Yeah, that's great. So it looks like you've gotten through all the questions, and I'm so grateful for your presentation. I found it inspiring in a really great way to end what's been a wonderful 3 days of the Wellness Summit. I'm grateful to you, Dr. Walls, and I'm grateful to all the attendees that joined us over the last 3 days. It's truly been our honor from the JCC and Jewish Family Services and Jewish Federation of Delaware to offer this in a virtual setting because times are difficult and uncertain. And I hope that everyone who participated was able to take something away from this, from any of the sessions that you attended. We are open to your feedback. I hope you'll look out for our survey and share your thoughts with us. Feel free to contact us with anything else you want to hear about for the future. And we're going to be sharing a lot of resources on our landing page, which is siegeljcc.org/wellness. And I hope you'll visit that page and get some of the great information that's there. We're also putting all of our session recordings there. So for any that you missed, that's a place to find them. And, just wishing you all good health, connection, and resilience in the upcoming months. Thank you all so much, and good night.
Thanks, Anna. Have a good night, everyone.